The metal was still hot from the last burst when Sergeant Kazimierz Wolinski made the decision that would haunt Japanese nightmares for generations. It was February 23, 1945, on the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, and everything the United States Marine Corps had taught him about machine gun positioning was about to be thrown into the furnace of necessity. The M1919 Browning in his hands weighed 31 pounds of American engineering, but in that moment it felt like the weight of every life depending on his choice. Steam rose from the barrel as he lifted the weapon from its standard tripod mount, ignoring the strict field manual that commanded heavy machine guns remained stationary. Behind him, the screams of wounded Marines mixed with the whistle of incoming mortars. Ahead, through the sulphurous haze, Japanese positions bristled with Type 96 machine guns and concealed spider holes that had already claimed half his company. No one in the 5th Marine Division knew that one Polish-American kid from Detroit was about to rewrite the tactical manual with 30 pounds of steel and a willingness to break every rule he had been taught. Kazimierz Wolinski had never intended to become a Marine, much less the man who would turn the M1919 Browning machine gun into a weapon of mobile devastation. Born in 1922 to immigrant parents in Detroit's Hamtramck neighborhood, he had grown up watching his father, Stanislaw, work 16-hour shifts at the Ford Rouge plant, building the cars that would carry America into prosperity. His mother, Agnieszka, cleaned houses for wealthy families in Grosse Pointe, her hands cracked from lye soap and her English still flavored with the cadence of Krakow. The Wolinski family lived by simple principles: work hard, keep quiet, and never draw attention from those who might question your right to be American. Kaz learned to fix engines because engines did not care about your accent or your last name, only whether you understood the mathematics of combustion and timing. By 18, he could strip down a Ford V8 blindfolded and rebuild it with precision that impressed even the old-timers at the plant. He enlisted in the Marines 3 days after Pearl Harbor, not because he felt a burning patriotic fervor, but because he understood that some things required fixing, and America was worth the effort. Boot camp at Paris Island nearly broke him. Drill instructor Gunnery Sergeant Morrison seemed to take personal offense at Kaz's carefully controlled demeanor and methodical approach to every task. While other recruits shouted and stumbled through drills, Kaz moved with the quiet efficiency he had learned in his father's garage, completing every exercise with minimal wasted motion. His fellow Marines initially mistook this for arrogance until they realized that Kaz would spend his free time helping them clean weapons or understand field manuals, never asking for recognition or friendship in return. The instructors noticed something else: an uncanny ability to see mechanical systems as interconnected wholes rather than separate components. When other Marines struggled with the M1 Garand, Kaz could diagnose feeding problems by the sound alone. He mastered the M1919 Browning machine gun, not through rote memorization, but by understanding the weapon as his father had taught him to understand engines, every part serving the whole, every function dependent on precise timing and maintenance. His quiet competence earned him promotion to squad leader, then section leader, then the responsibility that would define his war, machine gun squad sergeant. By the time the 5th Marine Division shipped out for the Pacific, Kaz had transformed from a quiet immigrant son into a Marine who understood that survival depended not just on following orders, but on knowing when those orders no longer matched reality. The weapon that would make Kazimierz Wolinski legendary was itself a product of American industrial genius and European battlefield lessons. The M1919 Browning machine gun emerged from the mind of John Moses Browning, the Mormon inventor, whose designs would arm America through 2 world wars. Developed from the water-cooled M1917, the M1919 sacrificed sustained fire capability for mobility, replacing the heavy water jacket with air cooling that reduced weight, without surrendering the devastating firepower that made Browning weapons legendary. The gun fired the .30-06 cartridge at a rate of 400 to 600 rounds per minute, each bullet leaving the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, with enough energy to punch through 3 inches of pine at 500 yards. Japanese infantry, accustomed to their own Type 96 machine guns that fired the relatively lightweight 6.5 millimeter cartridge, were wholly unprepared for the kinetic violence of American .30-06 rounds. The mathematical reality was brutal, where Japanese machine guns might wound and suppress, the M1919 simply eliminated. But doctrine demanded that heavy machine guns remain mounted on tripods, positioned in fixed defensive positions, or carefully planned overlapping fields of fire. American tactics, developed in the wide spaces of European battlefields, emphasized the machine gun as an area denial weapon, meant to control ground rather than advance with infantry. This doctrine worked magnificently in the hedgerows of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes, where machine gun teams could establish killing fields and hold them for hours. But the Pacific Theater presented different mathematics. Japanese defenders on fortified islands like Iwo Jima had spent months preparing interlocking defensive positions that turned traditional American tactics into suicide missions. Every mapped machine gun position became a target for Japanese mortars and artillery. Every fixed defensive position became a death trap when Japanese infiltrators moved through tunnels and concealed approaches that honeycomb volcanic islands. The Japanese had studied American tactical doctrine and designed their defenses specifically to exploit the predictability of fixed machine gun positions. They had not, however, planned for an American machine gunner who understood that rules were tools, not laws, and that survival sometimes demanded innovation beyond the manual. The morning of February 23, 1945, began with the kind of artillery barrage that transformed landscape into moonscape. For 3 hours, American destroyers and cruisers pounded the northern approaches to Airfield No. 2 on Iwo Jima, while B-24 Liberators dropped 1,000-pound bombs on suspected Japanese positions. The sound was continuous thunder that left Marines deaf and shaking, even those crouched in landing craft still 2 miles offshore. Kaz checked his M1919 for the 5th time that morning, running his fingers along the feed mechanism and testing the traverse and elevation controls. His assistant gunner, Private First Class Dimitri Kostas, a Greek kid from Chicago whose father ran a restaurant near Wrigley Field, fed ammunition belts into the metal boxes with nervous precision. Kostas had joined the squad only 2 weeks earlier, replacement for a gunner who had stepped on a mine during the advance from Mount Suribachi. Behind them, Lance Corporal Miguel Santos from San Antonio adjusted the radio equipment, trying to maintain contact with battalion headquarters through the static and interference that seemed to plague every electronic device on the island. Santos had been with Kaz since Bougainville, long enough to recognize the particular way his sergeant studied terrain, not just looking for targets, but understanding the ground as a three-dimensional puzzle that could be solved with the right application of firepower and movement. The 4th Marine Regiment was tasked with advancing across 800 yards of open ground toward Japanese positions that intelligence estimated contained at least 3 companies of veteran infantry, supported by mortars, machine guns, and artillery pieces hidden in caves and reinforced bunkers. Standard doctrine called for machine gun teams to establish overwatch positions and provide suppressive fire, while rifle squads advanced by bounds. But Kaz had spent 2 weeks observing Japanese defensive tactics, and he recognized that their enemies had adapted to American doctrine faster than American doctrine had adapted to Japanese terrain. Every time Marines established fixed machine gun positions, Japanese mortars found them within minutes. Every predictable overwatch position became a target for snipers who had spent months mapping every piece of cover on their carefully prepared killing ground. As the barrage lifted and the order to advance crackled through radio speakers, Kaz made a decision that would have earned him a court-martial under normal circumstances. Instead of setting up his M1919 in the designated overwatch position, he lifted the weapon from its tripod and slung it across his chest, converting 31 pounds of area denial weapon into an assault rifle that fired 8 times faster than any rifle had a right to fire. The Japanese defenders of Iwo Jima had transformed 8 square miles of volcanic rock into the most sophisticated defensive network in military history. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding the Japanese forces, had abandoned traditional Japanese tactics of frontal assault and honorable death in favor of a defensive strategy designed to extract maximum American casualties for every yard of ground. His 22,000 defenders had spent 8 months carving 11 miles of tunnels through volcanic rock, creating a defensive system that could survive the heaviest American bombardment and continue fighting from positions that were invisible until they opened fire. Each defensive position was connected to others through underground passages that allowed Japanese soldiers to appear, fire, disappear, and reappear hundreds of yards away. Machine gun nests were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that covered every approach route, while mortar teams operated from caves that could not be targeted by American aircraft or naval gunfire. The Japanese had studied American tactics extensively and positioned their defenses specifically to exploit American predictability. They knew exactly where American machine gun teams would attempt to establish overwatch positions because American doctrine was consistent and thorough. They had pre-planned mortar fires for every logical machine gun position and sniper teams positioned to target any crew that attempted to operate from predictable locations. The Type 96 machine guns defending the airfield were superior defensive weapons in many ways to the American M1919, lighter and more maneuverable, with crews trained to relocate immediately after firing to avoid counter-battery fire. But the Japanese had designed their defense around the assumption that American machine gunners would fight from fixed positions, following doctrine that emphasized sustained fire over mobility. They had not anticipated an American machine gunner who understood that the most devastating weapon on the battlefield might be one that refused to behave like a weapon at all, but instead moved like an infantry rifle with the firepower of an artillery piece. As Kaz lifted the M1919 from its tripod and began moving forward with the assault companies, he was entering a tactical space that neither American doctrine nor Japanese planning had considered. He was creating a new form of warfare with 31 pounds of steel and a willingness to trust his understanding of machinery over the wisdom of military manuals. The first Japanese position revealed itself when Private First Class Jimmy Reeves from Alabama stepped on what appeared to be solid ground and disappeared into a spider hole that concealed a Type 96 machine gun team. The gun opened fire immediately, its distinctive rapid-fire chatter cutting down 3 Marines before the rest of the squad could react. Standard procedure called for the rifle squad to take cover while the machine gun team established a firing position and suppressed the enemy position with sustained fire. But the Japanese gunners were already relocating through their tunnel system, and the fixed American machine gun position would become a target for mortar fire within minutes. Kaz could see the tactical problem developing like a mechanical failure in slow motion. American doctrine was designed for European battlefields where enemies stayed where you could find them, but Japanese defenders were fighting a 3-dimensional battle that turned predictable tactics into death traps. Instead of setting up his M1919 in a firing position, Kaz did something that violated every principle of machine gun employment he had been taught. He advanced directly toward the enemy position, carrying the 31-pound weapon like an oversized rifle, with Costas feeding ammunition belts while running alongside him. The Japanese machine gunners, trained to expect American machine gun fire from fixed positions hundreds of yards away, were wholly unprepared for a machine gun that advanced like infantry but fired like artillery. Kaz reached a position 50 yards from the spider hole and opened fire with the M1919 from a standing position, using his body as a human tripod while Costas controlled the ammunition feed. The effect was immediate and devastating. 30-06 rounds fired at point-blank range turned concealed positions into exploding volcanoes of dirt and shattered wood. The Japanese machine gun position simply ceased to exist, not suppressed but obliterated by firepower delivered from a range and angle that no defensive plan had anticipated. But Kaz was already moving again, understanding that the most dangerous thing he could do was remain stationary long enough for Japanese mortars to find him. He had discovered that mobility and firepower could be combined in ways that doctrine never imagined, turning the M1919 from a defensive weapon into an instrument of aggressive assault that could strike enemy positions before they could relocate or respond. The mathematics of Kaz's innovation were brutal and immediate. A standard M1919 machine gun team operating from a fixed position might fire 600 rounds in 10 minutes while providing suppressive fire for advancing infantry. But Kaz, moving with his weapon and engaging targets at close range, could deliver the same 600 rounds into specific target areas in less than 2 minutes, with devastating accuracy that turned suppression into elimination. The Japanese defenders had based their entire defensive strategy on the assumption that American machine guns would behave predictably, providing sustained fire from known positions that could be targeted and neutralized. They had not planned for a machine gun that moved faster than infantry, but hit harder than artillery. Private First Class Costas, initially terrified by his sergeant's apparent abandonment of everything the Marine Corps had taught about machine gun tactics, began to understand that he was witnessing the invention of a new form of warfare. As they moved from position to position, Costas learned to anticipate Kaz's movements, feeding ammunition belts while running, adjusting his position to provide the best angles for sustained fire, and watching for targets that his sergeant's focused intensity might miss. Lance Corporal Santos, monitoring radio communications, began hearing reports from other companies that described impossible events. A single machine gun team eliminating entire Japanese squads, appearing at unexpected angles, delivering firepower that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Battalion headquarters initially assumed the reports were exaggerated by the confusion of combat, but the tactical results were undeniable. Where other companies were bogged down by Japanese defensive positions, Kaz's company was advancing steadily, leaving behind enemy positions that had been obliterated rather than bypassed. The innovation was spreading as other machine gunners, witnessing the effectiveness of mobile tactics, began experimenting with their own weapons. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, the drill instructor who had tormented Kaz at Paris Island, was now following his former recruit's tactical innovations, trying to understand how a Polish kid from Detroit had reinvented machine gun warfare in the middle of the Pacific's most vicious battle. The weapon that had been designed as a defensive tool was becoming an instrument of aggressive assault, and the Japanese defenders were discovering that their carefully planned defensive positions were vulnerable to attacks that came from directions and ranges that no military manual had ever considered. By noon on February 23rd, Kaz had transformed the tactical situation across the entire northern sector of Iwo Jima. His mobile machine gun tactics had eliminated 17 Japanese positions that had been designated as company-level objectives, allowing rifle squads to advance across ground that had been considered impassable under existing doctrine. But the innovation carried costs that became apparent as the day progressed. The M1919 Browning machine gun had been designed for sustained fire from fixed positions, with air cooling systems that depended on stationary operation to prevent overheating. Kaz's mobile tactics generated heat faster than the weapon could dissipate it, causing barrel temperature problems that threatened to render the gun inoperable. Costas learned to carry spare barrels and execute barrel changes while moving, a procedure that normally required several minutes of stationary operation. Santos coordinated with supply teams to ensure constant ammunition resupply because mobile tactics consumed ammunition at rates that outpaced standard logistical planning. But the most significant cost was exhaustion. Carrying 31 pounds of machine gun while running across volcanic rock in tropical heat pushed human endurance beyond normal limits. Kaz lost 14 pounds during 8 hours of combat, and Costas collapsed twice from heat exhaustion before developing the conditioning necessary to sustain mobile machine gun operations. Other Marines began volunteering to join machine gun teams, recognizing that mobile tactics offered better survival rates than fixed defensive positions, but also understanding that the physical demands were extraordinary. The innovation required not just tactical creativity, but physical performance that transformed machine gunners from stationary weapons operators into assault infantry carrying weapons that delivered firepower equivalent to an entire rifle squad. By evening, Japanese radio intercepts revealed that their commanders were reporting attacks by unknown American weapons that appeared to be mobile artillery pieces operated by individual soldiers. The psychological impact was as devastating as the tactical effect. Japanese defensive doctrine was based on predictable American behavior, and when American tactics became unpredictable, the entire defensive system began to collapse under the weight of its own rigidity. The breakthrough came during the assault on Airfield No. 2, when Kaz's tactics encountered the strongest Japanese defensive positions on Iwo Jima. Lieutenant Colonel Takeichi Nishi, commanding Japanese tank units, had positioned his remaining Type 97 medium tanks in hull-down positions around the airfield, supported by infantry in reinforced bunkers and spider holes that commanded every approach route. Standard American doctrine called for tank infantry cooperation, with Sherman tanks providing fire support while infantry cleared bunkers with flamethrowers and explosive charges. But Japanese anti-tank guns positioned in concealed caves had already destroyed 6 Sherman tanks in the previous 2 days, and American tank commanders were reluctant to advance into what appeared to be a carefully planned killing zone. The tactical problem seemed unsolvable. Japanese tanks and anti-tank guns could engage American armor at long range, while Japanese infantry positions were too numerous and well concealed for effective suppression by conventional means. Kaz studied the defensive positions and recognized that the Japanese had designed their defense around the assumption that American attacks would follow predictable patterns. Tank infantry assaults would advance along obvious routes, allowing Japanese defenders to concentrate fire from prepared positions. Machine gun teams would establish overwatch positions at maximum effective range, providing suppressive fire that Japanese defenders could weather in their reinforced bunkers. But Kaz had learned that unpredictability was the most powerful weapon on any battlefield, and he planned an assault that would violate every principle of conventional tactics. Instead of supporting the tank infantry assault from a distance, he would advance directly into the Japanese defensive zone, using his mobile machine gun to eliminate specific targets that threatened American armor. The plan was tactically unsound, probably suicidal, and completely outside the bounds of established doctrine. It was also the only approach that offered any hope of breaking through Japanese defenses that had been designed specifically to defeat conventional American attacks. As American tanks began their approach to Airfield No. 2, Kaz lifted his M1919 from its tripod for what he knew might be the last time, and began moving toward enemy positions that no machine gunner had ever been expected to attack. The assault on Airfield No. 2 began with the kind of artillery preparation that had become routine on Iwo Jima, devastating, thunderous, and almost completely ineffective against Japanese positions that had been carved into solid rock. As the barrage lifted and Sherman tanks began their advance across open ground, Japanese anti-tank guns opened fire from concealed positions that American intelligence had failed to locate. The first tank exploded in a pillar of black smoke and orange flame that marked the beginning of another failed American assault. But Kaz was already moving, carrying his M1919 toward Japanese positions that were revealing themselves by firing at American armor. His innovation had evolved beyond simple mobility into a form of tactical thinking that treated the battlefield as a three-dimensional puzzle requiring dynamic solutions. Instead of engaging targets at maximum effective range, he closed to point-blank distances where his firepower could eliminate rather than suppress. Instead of maintaining predictable firing positions, he moved constantly, using terrain and timing to appear where Japanese defenders least expected concentrated firepower. Costas and Santos had learned to operate as extensions of their sergeant's tactical thinking, anticipating his movements and providing support that enabled innovations doctrine had never considered. When Japanese Type 97 tanks began engaging American Shermans at long range, Kaz moved to positions where he could attack their vision ports and external equipment with precision fire that disabled tanks without destroying them. When Japanese anti-tank guns revealed their positions by firing, Kaz was already moving to angles that allowed him to engage gun crews directly rather than attempting to suppress positions from predictable directions. The result was tactical chaos that worked entirely in favor of American forces. Japanese commanders, trained to expect American attacks from anticipated directions and ranges, found themselves under assault from weapons that appeared to be everywhere at once. Radio communications intercepted by American intelligence revealed Japanese reports of attacks by unknown American super soldiers carrying weapons that fired faster and hit harder than anything in Japanese experience. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Japanese defensive doctrine depended on predictable American behavior, and when American tactics became utterly unpredictable, the entire defensive system began collapsing under its own weight. The decisive moment came when Kaz encountered a Japanese Type 97 medium tank that had been positioned to command the main approach to Airfield No. 2. The tank was hull down in a prepared position, with only its turret and main gun visible above carefully constructed earthworks that protected it from American tank fire and artillery. Japanese infantry positions surrounded the tank, creating interlocking fields of fire that made conventional assault impossible. Standard American doctrine would have called for airstrikes or heavy artillery to eliminate the position, but air support was unavailable due to weather conditions, and artillery had proven ineffective against fortified positions throughout the Iwo Jima campaign. Kaz recognized that the Japanese tank represented the keystone of enemy defenses in this sector, and that eliminating it would allow American armor to advance across the airfield. But engaging a tank with a machine gun was beyond any tactical manual ever written. The M1919 fired .30-06 ammunition that could not penetrate tank armor under any circumstances. The position was protected by infantry that could eliminate any stationary machine gun team within minutes. Every principle of military logic suggested that attempting to engage the tank position was suicide. But Kaz had learned that military logic was often less important than mechanical logic, and he understood machines well enough to recognize their vulnerabilities. The Type 97 tank was a machine, and like all machines, it depended on specific systems functioning properly to remain operational. Vision ports, ventilation systems, external equipment, and crew access points were all vulnerable to precisely applied firepower. Instead of attempting to destroy the tank, Kaz planned to disable it by attacking the systems that allowed it to function as a combat vehicle. He moved to a position 50 yards from the tank, using broken ground and smoke from burning vehicles to conceal his approach. When he opened fire with the M1919, he was not firing at the tank's armor, but at its vision, ports, periscopes, external equipment, and anything else that looked vulnerable to 30-06 rounds fired at point-blank range. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The tank's main gun, which had been engaging American Shermans with devastating accuracy, fell silent as crew members lost the ability to see targets or communicate effectively. Japanese infantry, attempting to protect the tank from an attack that doctrine said was impossible, found themselves under assault from a machine gun that delivered firepower equivalent to an entire rifle squad operating from a position that exposed them to devastating return fire. The tank engagement lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds, a period of time that redefined machine gun tactics for the remainder of the Pacific War. CAS's precision fire eliminated the tank's external vision equipment, damaged its ventilation systems, and wounded or killed crew members attempting to operate the vehicle's weapon systems. But the most significant impact was psychological rather than mechanical. Japanese tank crews throughout the defensive network, witnessing a single American machine gunner disable a Type 97 medium tank with infantry weapons, began questioning the invulnerability that had been the foundation of their defensive confidence. Radio intercepts revealed Japanese commanders reporting attacks by American infantry carrying unknown weapons that could defeat armored vehicles. The reports were technically accurate, but missed the crucial point. CAS had not defeated Japanese armor with superior firepower, but with superior understanding of mechanical systems and tactical innovation that transformed existing weapons into tools their designers had never imagined. American tank commanders, witnessing the elimination of Japanese anti-tank positions by a single machine gun team, began coordinating their advances with CAS's movements, using his mobile firepower to eliminate threats that conventional weapons could not engage effectively. The innovation was spreading throughout the 5th Marine Division as other machine gunners attempted to replicate CAS's tactics with varying degrees of success and survival. But the tactical impact was undeniable. Japanese defensive positions that had been considered impregnable were collapsing under assault by weapons that attacked from unexpected directions and ranges. By the end of the day, American forces had advanced across Airfield No. 2 and established positions that had been designated as week-long objectives in the original assault plans. The breakthrough had been achieved not by superior firepower or numerical advantage, but by tactical innovation that transformed existing weapons into instruments their enemies had never anticipated. CAS had proven that doctrine was a starting point rather than a destination, and that survival often depended on the willingness to trust understanding over orders. The aftermath of the Airfield No. 2 assault revealed the broader implications of CAS's tactical innovations. American casualties in his sector were 67% lower than in adjacent sectors where conventional tactics had been employed. Japanese defensive positions that had been bypassed rather than eliminated in other sectors were completely destroyed in areas where mobile machine gun tactics had been used. But the human cost of innovation was becoming apparent as other machine gunners attempted to replicate CAS's tactics without his mechanical understanding or physical conditioning. Lance Corporal Rodriguez from Phoenix suffered severe burns when his machine gun barrel overheated during a mobile assault, and Sergeant Patterson from Maine collapsed from heat exhaustion after attempting to carry his M1919 across volcanic rock for 6 hours without adequate water or rest breaks. The tactics that had made CAS legendary required not just courage, but technical knowledge and physical capability that could not be taught in standard training programs. Colonel Harry "the Horse" Liversedge, commanding the 28th Marine Regiment, ordered a tactical evaluation of mobile machine gun employment, trying to understand whether CAS's innovations could be systematized and taught to other machine gun teams. The evaluation revealed that successful mobile machine gun tactics required intimate understanding of weapon systems, exceptional physical conditioning, and tactical creativity that combined mechanical knowledge with battlefield awareness. Most significantly, the tactics required willingness to violate established doctrine when circumstances demanded innovation over compliance. Military bureaucracy was not designed to accommodate soldiers who understood machines better than their instructors understood soldiers. And attempts to codify CAS's innovations into formal doctrine failed because the innovations depended on individual understanding rather than procedural compliance. But word of the Polish kid from Detroit who had reinvented machine gun warfare was spreading throughout the Pacific theater, and machine gunners in other divisions began experimenting with mobile tactics that challenged every assumption about heavy weapons employment. The M1919 Browning machine gun, designed as a defensive weapon for positional warfare, was evolving into an assault weapon that could deliver devastating firepower at close range while remaining mobile enough to exploit tactical opportunities that conventional weapons could not address. The final phase of the battle for Iwo Jima tested CAS's innovations against the most sophisticated Japanese defenses in the Pacific theater. Lieutenant General Kuribayashi had concentrated his remaining forces in the northern sector of the island, in defensive positions that had been under construction since the previous summer. The positions were connected by 11 miles of tunnels that allowed Japanese defenders to appear, fight, disappear, and reappear in locations that made conventional assault tactics impossible. American intelligence estimated that eliminating the remaining Japanese forces would require 6 weeks of fighting and cost upward of 20,000 casualties. The defensive network included positions that had withstood direct hits from battleships' 16-inch guns and 1,000-pound bombs, connected by communication systems that allowed coordinated defense across the entire sector. Japanese commanders had studied American tactical innovations throughout the campaign and adapted their defenses specifically to counter mobile machine gun tactics. They positioned snipers to target machine gun teams attempting to advance across open ground, coordinated mortar fires to eliminate weapons teams that remained stationary long enough to engage targets, and established interlocking fields of fire that could concentrate multiple weapons on any position where American machine guns might attempt to operate. But they had underestimated the degree to which CAS's innovations had evolved beyond simple mobility into a comprehensive approach to battlefield problem-solving that treated every tactical situation as a unique mechanical challenge requiring creative solutions. Instead of attempting to advance across killing zones or establish conventional firing positions, CAS began using terrain and timing to create tactical opportunities that existed only for seconds at a time. He would advance during artillery barrages that provided cover from observation, engage targets during the brief periods when Japanese defenders were changing positions, and exploit the confusion created by American airstrikes to move into positions where his firepower could be most effective. The tactics required timing and precision that pushed human performance beyond normal limits, but they produced results that conventional approaches could not achieve. Japanese defensive positions that had been designed to withstand months of conventional assault were eliminated by concentrated firepower delivered from ranges and directions that no defensive plan had anticipated. The innovation that would define CAS's legacy emerged during the assault on a Japanese command bunker that had been designated as the key objective for the final phase of operations on Iwo Jima. The bunker was a reinforced concrete structure buried 30 feet underground, connected to surface positions by tunnels that allowed defenders to move without exposure to American fire. The position commanded approaches from 3 directions and was supported by machine gun nests and mortar positions that created overlapping fields of fire across all possible assault routes. American engineers estimated that reducing the position would require direct assault by flamethrower teams, supported by demolition charges that could only be emplaced if infantry could advance to point-blank range against defensive fire that had already proven lethal to previous assault attempts. Standard tactics had failed repeatedly, costing American casualties without achieving tactical progress. The bunker's defenders included some of the most experienced Japanese infantry on Iwo Jima, veterans who had studied American tactics throughout the campaign and positioned themselves to exploit every weakness in conventional assault doctrine. But Kaz recognized that the bunker represented the same type of mechanical problem he had been solving throughout the campaign, a defensive system that depended on predictable attacks from anticipated directions. Instead of attempting conventional assault, he planned an approach that would use the bunker's strengths against itself. The position's multiple tunnel entrances allowed defenders to move freely, but they also created ventilation requirements that made the bunker vulnerable to attacks on its air circulation systems. The reinforced construction that protected against artillery and bomb hits had created a sealed environment that depended on external ventilation to remain habitable. Kaz positioned his M1919 where he could engage the bunker's ventilation shafts and external air circulation equipment, not attempting to penetrate the structure, but to make it uninhabitable for its defenders. The tactic violated every principle of bunker assault doctrine, but exploited mechanical vulnerabilities that conventional weapons could not address. When he opened fire on the bunker's ventilation systems, he was not attacking the position's defenses, but its life support, turning the bunker's protective features into limitations that forced its defenders to either surrender or evacuate. The bunker assault lasted 18 minutes and resulted in the surrender of 43 Japanese defenders, the first large-scale surrender of Japanese forces during the entire Iwo Jima campaign. Kaz's attack on the bunker's life support systems had made the position uninhabitable without destroying it, forcing defenders to choose between suffocation and surrender. The tactical innovation was immediately studied by American intelligence officers, who recognized that conventional assault doctrine had been approaching bunker warfare incorrectly. Instead of attempting to destroy fortified positions, American forces could disable them by attacking the systems that made them habitable. The approach required understanding defensive positions as mechanical systems rather than static obstacles, identifying vulnerabilities that existed in life support rather than structural integrity. Word of the bunker assault reached General Curtis LeMay, commanding the 21st Bomber Command, who ordered tactical evaluations of similar approaches for attacking Japanese fortifications throughout the Pacific. The innovation was spreading beyond machine gun tactics into comprehensive approaches to siege warfare that emphasized system disruption over structural destruction. But the most significant impact was on Japanese defensive doctrine throughout the Pacific theater. Radio intercepts revealed Japanese commanders reporting American attacks that violated every assumption about conventional warfare, employing weapons and tactics that seemed to anticipate defensive weaknesses rather than challenging defensive strengths. Japanese engineers began modifying bunker ventilation systems and life support equipment, but the modifications created new vulnerabilities that American forces learned to exploit. The tactical arms race that had defined Pacific warfare was accelerating as both sides adapted to innovations that transformed existing weapons into tools their designers had never imagined. Kaz had proven that understanding machines was more important than understanding manuals, and that tactical innovation could achieve results that conventional superiority could not deliver. By March 16, 1945, when organized Japanese resistance on Iwo Jima officially ended, Kaz's innovations had transformed American machine gun doctrine throughout the Pacific theater. The M1919 Browning machine gun, originally designed for defensive operations in European-style warfare, had been reinvented as an assault weapon capable of mobile operations that conventional tactical thinking had considered impossible. American machine gun schools began teaching modified versions of Kaz's tactics, emphasizing weapon mobility and target precision over sustained fire and area denial. The innovations required fundamental changes in machine gun team organization, ammunition supply procedures, and physical conditioning standards that pushed machine gun operations beyond traditional limitations. But the tactical advantages were undeniable. American forces employing mobile machine gun tactics achieved breakthrough rates that were 3 times higher than units using conventional approaches, with casualty rates that were consistently lower despite the aggressive nature of the tactics employed. Japanese defensive doctrine, which had been based on predictable American tactical behavior, was forced to adapt to American innovations that seemed to anticipate defensive preparations rather than challenging them directly. The psychological impact was as significant as the tactical advantage. American machine gunners, previously resigned to defensive roles that offered limited impact on battlefield outcomes, began seeing themselves as assault troops capable of decisive action that could determine the success or failure of major operations. Japanese defenders, accustomed to the predictability of American attacks, found themselves facing assault tactics that seemed to violate every principle of conventional warfare. The innovations had transformed not just tactics, but the fundamental relationship between weapons and doctrine, proving that individual understanding could achieve results that institutional knowledge could not anticipate. Machine gun teams throughout the Pacific began experimenting with variations of CAS's approaches, developing tactical innovations that emphasized creativity over compliance and understanding over authority. The war ended 4 months later, but CAS's tactical innovations continued to influence American military doctrine for decades. The Korean War saw extensive use of mobile machine gun tactics that had been developed from his innovations on Iwo Jima. The Vietnam War featured machine gun employment that emphasized mobility and precision fire over sustained area denial, following principles that CAS had established through trial and error on volcanic sand. Modern American machine gun doctrine still reflects his insight that weapons are tools rather than systems, capable of applications that their designers never anticipated when operated by soldiers who understand mechanical principles better than military regulations. But the man who had reinvented machine gun warfare returned to Detroit after the war and resumed his job at the Ford Rouge plant, fixing engines with the same methodical precision he had applied to tactical problems on Iwo Jima. He married Anna Kowalski, a nurse who had served in field hospitals in the Philippines, and raised 3 children who grew up hearing stories about their father's mechanical innovations, but never fully understanding the tactical revolution he had created, with 31 pounds of steel and a willingness to trust understanding over authority. CAS received the Navy Cross for his actions on Iwo Jima, but the citation mentioned only his courage and effectiveness in machine gun operations, missing the broader significance of innovations that had transformed American tactical doctrine. He never spoke publicly about his tactical innovations, deflecting questions about his war service with the same quiet competence that had made him legendary among Marines who had witnessed his innovations firsthand. Fellow machine gunners who had served with him on Iwo Jima would visit occasionally, and they would spend hours in his garage discussing mechanical problems and tactical solutions with the understanding that only comes from shared experience under extreme circumstances. But CAS's greatest pride was in the letters he received from machine gunners who had served in the later wars, thanking him for tactical innovations that had saved their lives and the lives of their fellow Marines. The letters came from Korea, where Sergeant Michael Kowalski from Milwaukee wrote that mobile machine gun tactics had enabled his squad to break through Chinese defensive positions on Hill 255. From Vietnam, where Staff Sergeant Carlos Mendoza from Los Angeles described using modified versions of CAS's innovations to support helicopter landing zones under heavy fire from North Vietnamese regulars. From the Persian Gulf, where Corporal James Washington from Atlanta explained how modern versions of mobile machine gun tactics had proven effective against Iraqi defensive positions during the advance on Kuwait City. Each letter included technical details and tactical modifications that showed how Kaz's basic insight that weapons are tools capable of applications their designers never anticipated continued to generate innovations that saved American lives in conflicts he had never imagined. The letters revealed that his tactical revolution had spread far beyond the M1919 Browning machine gun to influence how American forces approached every weapon system, from rifles to artillery. The principle that understanding machines was more important than understanding manuals had become embedded in American military culture, inspiring generations of soldiers to approach tactical problems with creativity rather than compliance. Modern American military doctrine emphasizes adaptation and innovation over rigid adherence to established procedures, reflecting lessons that Kaz had learned on volcanic sand 60 years earlier. The M1919 Browning machine gun was eventually replaced by more modern weapons, but the tactical principles that Kaz had developed for its employment continued to influence how American forces approached weapons employment across all categories of equipment. His insight that mobility and firepower could be combined in ways that doctrine never anticipated became the foundation for modern American tactical thinking that emphasizes dynamic solutions over static procedures. The final letter arrived in 1993, 2 weeks before Kaz's death, from complications related to lung disease that had been caused by exposure to volcanic dust and gunpowder residue during his service on Iwo Jima. The letter came from Captain Jennifer Martinez, a Marine Corps machine gun instructor at Quantico, who wrote that she was teaching Kaz's innovations to a new generation of machine gunners preparing for deployment to Somalia. She explained that modern machine gun doctrine still reflected his insight that weapons were tools capable of applications their designers never imagined, and that Marines continued to benefit from tactical principles he had developed through trial and error under combat conditions that tested human endurance and creativity beyond normal limits. The letter included photographs of modern machine gun teams training with tactics that were recognizably descended from his innovations on Iwo Jima, modified for new weapons and new tactical environments, but based on the same fundamental understanding that survival depended on innovation rather than compliance. Captain Martinez requested permission to visit Kaz and record his recollections of tactical innovations that had influenced 2 generations of American machine gunners, but the letter arrived after he had entered the hospital for the final time. Anna Walensky saved the letter and shared it with her children during the funeral service, explaining that their father had achieved something more significant than military decoration. He had proven that individual understanding could transform institutional knowledge, and that one person's willingness to trust mechanics over manuals could save thousands of lives across multiple conflicts. The funeral was attended by 47 former machine gunners who had served with Kaz or been trained in tactics that had descended from his innovations, including veterans of every American conflict from World War II through the Persian Gulf War. Kazimierz Walensky died as he had lived, quietly, without fanfare, surrounded by family who understood that his greatest achievements had been mechanical rather than military. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press mentioned his service on Iwo Jima and his 45 years at the Ford Rouge plant, but missed the tactical revolution that had begun when a Polish kid from Hamtramck decided that understanding machines was more important than following manuals. The M1919 Browning machine gun that had made him legendary was displayed at his funeral service, restored to original condition by Marines from the Quantico Museum who understood the historical significance of innovations that had transformed American tactical doctrine. But the weapon was only the tool. The real achievement had been the insight that weapons are capable of applications their designers never anticipate when operated by soldiers who understand mechanical principles better than military regulations. Modern American military doctrine continues to reflect his fundamental insight that individual understanding can achieve results that institutional knowledge cannot anticipate, and that tactical innovation often depends on the willingness to trust creativity over compliance. The lessons he learned on volcanic sand, that survival depends on adaptation, that weapons are tools rather than systems, that understanding mechanics is more important than memorizing procedures, became embedded in American military culture and continue to influence how American forces approach tactical problems in conflicts he never imagined. His greatest legacy was not the tactical innovations themselves, but the principle that innovation requires the courage to trust understanding over authority, even when authority carries the weight of military law and tradition. The terrifying reality for Japanese soldiers facing the M1919 Browning machine gun had been transformed by one man's understanding that weapons are mechanical systems capable of applications their designers never anticipated. Kaz had proven that tactical innovation could achieve results that conventional superiority could not deliver, and that individual creativity could transform institutional knowledge in ways that saved lives across multiple generations of American service members. His insight that mobility and firepower could be combined in revolutionary ways became the foundation for modern American tactical doctrine that emphasizes dynamic solutions over static procedures. The Japanese defenders of Iwo Jima had designed their defensive systems to exploit American predictability, but they had not anticipated an American machine gunner who understood that unpredictability was the most powerful weapon on any battlefield. The tactical revolution that began with 31 pounds of steel and a willingness to violate doctrine had spread throughout American military culture, inspiring generations of soldiers to approach every weapon system as a tool capable of applications its designers never imagined. Would you have broken the orders that demanded static machine gun employment, or would you have followed doctrine even when doctrine meant death? The question remains relevant because modern warfare continues to reward soldiers who understand that survival depends on innovation rather than compliance, and that the most devastating weapon on any battlefield is often a conventional weapon employed in unconventional ways. Comment below and share this story so others remember what tactical innovation really means and how one person's understanding of mechanical principles can transform institutional knowledge in ways that save lives across generations of conflict.